when you write your first book, you start, I'm assuming you don't know it's terrible when you're writing. You think it's going to be great, and it's not until later with being able to look back on it and realize, hey, you know what? It did its job. I got started. So I got a couple of those. Were you always thinking I will write horror when that was the first decision, or is it something you came to once you started writing?
I think it's something I came to, and really like Flight 171 is my first book that really dips a bigger toe into horror. I mean, I think Gated was kind of in the realm, so it started there because my very first book, like I said, was sort of this romancy, twilighty sort of thing, which is just absolutely not me. I don't even really read in that realm. But I was kind of going off of what was happening at the time. So it was the second book, I would say, that probably like the hints of what I was going to do later were really there, because Gated is about an apocalyptic cult, and it's really about this young girl who's grown up in this cult 100 miles from the closest town. Everyone's convinced the world's going to end, and it's really that last little bit of time leading up to them sealing themselves underground to survive the apocalypse. So there's some horror with that book. It's mostly thriller. It's mostly sort of a suspense, but I would say like that was when I realized I was maybe gonna probably go more in that darker vein, because when I have ideas, they tend to be in that area just naturally. So the first book, I was sort of putting together a bunch of things that I was emulating, but it wasn't really an idea necessarily. It was more like, I think people like this romantic stuff. I think they like these other worlds. Let me kind of combine fantasy and romance in a Twilighty kind of way, but without vampires. And it fell flat because I wasn't passionate. But as soon as I had the idea about this girl growing up in a doomsday cult, around the time that the Mayan apocalypse was going to happen, it fed into my own thing of like, how weird is it that people really fall for this and like go in 100%. And it mixed with the creepiness of I live in Tampa, and I used to take my daughter to the Clearwater Library for story time, and that's right near the Scientology headquarters. And so there would be times when you're going into the library and you would see these people walking like en masse down the street in white shirts, black pants, like all the same clothes. Very strange, and they're Scientologists. So I always found that like really disconcerting. So it kind of hit that. And I think it's because those are the things I notice. Like I notice the darker side of things all the time. And maybe that has something to do with my upbringing. I come from like evangelical people who are constantly like, scaring me with stories of end times and resurrection and all of this thing about how you're going to be left behind. And so maybe from a very young age, that's sort of been instilled in me, this idea of having, this constant fear of something going horribly wrong. Because, in that space, you're always told if you don't believe enough, you might get left behind. Like it's going to be really horrible. Like there was that piece. So I think I was maybe always fascinated with that darker side, because that was kind of dark. Like when looking back, it's a little bit weird that you tell a kid who's under 10, like you might get left behind and all your family goes up to heaven and you get stuck here because you're a sinner and you messed up. There's something kind of traumatizing about that. So probably that had the like led into my interest in horror. And when I started looking into the apocalyptic cult, that was partly me dealing with some of that stuff from my background, and trying to figure out what I thought about religion and what I thought about how people teach religion to one another, and what it's like to be a kid in a situation where you're sort of doubting some of the things you've been told, but you don't know what to do with those doubts. And that felt like me because it was true to my own experience. So that started it, but I think I was always destined because, like I said, I was watching horror movies as a little kid, and I remember staying up all night watching The Clock in the Walls. There was a really old version of that, like way back in the 70s, and I watched it and stayed up all night, and I was probably in like second grade at the time. And that was maybe the one I can remember, but I feel like maybe that was always going to be the path I took. So once I had those ideas, I never looked back because it was so natural. Like my ideas, just that's where they come from. They come from that well.
I also have a religious upbringing, and I think that really fed into it. And then looking back, it's no longer the stories about hell and being burning that scare me. It's you told that to a child. You sat me down And then you can imagine everybody I love being separated and
Yes.
tortured because of whether we were going to do this or not. And then of course I look at the news and I say, oh, there's the Christian flag raiding the Capitol. Oh, there was a horror story all along there. It just wasn't the one that was official.
Right. I mean, I can remember sitting in a group watching a film in church, and it was a film where, the rapture was called. So everybody's taken up with the rapture, but you're left behind because you did something wrong. And somehow, God didn't accept you for the rapture. So now you're stuck on earth and you have to die this martyr's death. And it literally was showing teenagers being like hung. And I remember watching this thinking, oh my gosh, if I sin and I mess up and I get stuck here, I'm going to be hung. Like I'm going to have a martyr's death. This is terrible. And like literally being so nervous, like that scared me almost worse than horror movies did. And then trying to make sense of it because it felt real. So, when your adults around you are telling you that's absolutely a possibility. And then every Sunday they're like, are you sure you're okay? Maybe you should come up and recommit because you might not be. And I would be up at the altar like, every week, like I better go just to make sure. Because what if this week I don't go up there and then things go down? So
You hear like a car horn or something in the background. Like, wait, was that the trumpet? Is this the
yes,
start of the eruption?
let me pray really quick. I got to get myself right. So
I have active thoughts about it's too bad I'm not going to grow up. There's so much to learn and love. It's too bad that's never going to happen. The end of the world's gonna occur first.
exactly, like you're kind of told that, and I remember thinking like I just want to get married and have kids. Like I hope I make it that long. Like, but you don't know. Like the way that it's presented, you don't know. And I don't think they thought they were being damaging, but it does when you kind of grow up under that thing. There's a certain amount of constant fear that you're sort of living with. Um, that's you have to sort of reconcile with yourself as you get older and you start to realize like what that really was and how it wasn't truthful necessarily. It was just everybody was kind of under the sway of this idea. So, and the Left Behind series, I think, kind of led into that. That was really popular when we were younger. It was like such a big selling book and widespread, and that sort of, didn't glamorize it, but it made it into this like movie and this thing, and it felt, I think, really realistic to a lot of people. So,
Yeah, no, I read the whole series. Was greatly impressed. Got Kurt Cameron, the big
oh
star.
yeah, right? Exactly. That was back in the day when Growing Pains was we all knew him from that stuff. So yeah, there is some of that, and I think there's a lot of us I think in horror, so that just probably tells you something.
There are some good sides too. I never tried. I was trying to mention that hey, there was also a real sense of community. There were lots of
Yes.
nice meals that people prepared for me. There was genuine care and concern from neighbors. There are parts of a religious community that I miss greatly, but on the whole, I think I think there's a lot of danger there.
Well, and that's what makes it confusing, right? But that also I think works as a writer because you realize like things that are bad or scary, like it's so complicated because it can come from people who are really genuinely trying to do something good, right? So the people around me, I never felt like they were trying to scare me on purpose or traumatize me on purpose. They really thought they were doing good by saying what they were saying, like 100%. These were not people trying to be nefarious or abusive or whatever. I mean, in their hearts, they were thinking, I'm telling you the right thing. I'm trying to help you, and that's what's I find endlessly fascinating about anything that's horrific is that it's complex. There are pieces that don't really match up to the horrific part. And you see that with like, serial killers, for instance, this idea that they have families and, they can be a father to a child and then turn around and do these grotesque things. And the child is unaware of this other part of their parent. And the fact that those things can coexist in a person, I think I will always be fascinated because I don't know we'll ever answer the question of why that is, no matter how long we explore it.
No, if you genuinely believe that a child's going to go to hell if you don't give them the good news and right this minute, you would be a monster not to do it.
Exactly. Exactly. So you can't fault them necessarily. Where I feel bad is for the people that, never really come out of that. So, it just kind of propagates it. And I am a person of faith, so it's not like I've given up faith entirely. It's just there are aspects of religion that I have some struggle with. So
Well, and I'm also a person of faith, although not specific, and I've just given up on the idea that one day I'll understand. No, I'm pretty gonna get that's not gonna happen. I'll
I agree.
maybe little slightly greater understanding than I have now. But even once, assuming that we die and there's an afterlife, I still don't expect to have all the answers. Like, you just got here, bro. You're gonna
Yeah,
have to go
exactly.
But I do find that there are layers that I've just accepted that I'm never going to peel all of that early training away, because it's just so foundational that it bleeds over into every other. It's like racism in that way. I'm forever finding so, oh, that was also racism from childhood.
Yeah,
That's crazy. And when you identify it, you try to isolate it, put it aside, say, nope, I'm an adult now. I'm making the decisions. I don't want that. But
yeah,
it's just there.
it's true. And